I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. You've heard of the Sagrada Familia. Maybe you've even been there. We'll tell you about the inspiration for one of the church's most famous basilicas.
It's phenomenal. You look at the forms that Gaudi used, and you know they're just not forms that other people have ever used before and used together.
Plus, what group has the happiest job? The answer may surprise you.
It's not the money you have, it's the satisfaction you receive and the human interaction that really counts. And certainly clergy, priests get that from their people.
And they're not runaway brides. These women are taking to the streets for a very important reason.
Once you see all these women in white walking down these streets, it sends a powerful, powerful message that, domestic violence is not acceptable.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Now, you always hear about long construction projects. Here in New York, the 2nd Avenue subway, I think, has been going on, since the 20s? They've been trying to build that thing. Well, there's one church that actually takes the whole delayed schedule concept to a whole different level. It's the Basilica of La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, Spain. Now, construction got underway back in 1882. Yeah, Antonio Gaudi, the best known architect of La Sagrada, took over the project a year later, and now 128 years later, this landmark is still not finished. Nonetheless, La Sagrada remains a sight to behold, and even in its unfinished state, the church is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, that is. In November of last year, it was designated a minor basilica by Pope Benedict XVI. Well, last night, New Yorkers got a chance to get a closer look at La Sagrada without buying a plane ticket. The Archbishop of Barcelona was in town, and he gave a talk at Holy Family Church near the United Nations, and also gave an insider's look at the iconic structure.
People are here today to hear His Eminence Cardinal Sistach, the Archbishop of Barcelona, give a lecture about the Basilica of La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, which last year was consecrated by the Holy Father, Pope Benedict, and is an architectural gem in the crown of all of the world's churches.
In this space, Gaudi wanted to unite what inspired him as a man in the 3 great books that helped to inspire him as a man, as a believer, and as an architect.
You can certainly see it in 1 or 2 hours, but to really see it and appreciate it, you need at least a few days. Because Gaudi planned every single detail very rich in symbolism.
It's phenomenal. You look at the forms that Gaudi used, and you know they're just not forms that other people have ever used before and used together.
Just the height, you can see it from everywhere. Everywhere I was in Barcelona that week, I could stare from my terrace and I could see it. You could see it from everywhere.
The beauty of the Sagrada Familia knows how to speak to man today. It conserves at the same time the fundamental traces of ancient art.
I'm from a town near Barcelona, and having such basilica consecrated by the Pope the month of November, it's such impressive to be in the center of the new evangelization of Europe, of all Europe, to recover Christian roots and the Christian faith.
Es ciertamente un peregrinaje para los cristianos.
Certainly, I believe that it was a pilgrimage for Christians, and in it you really get, the Holy Scriptures, you get the life of Jesus, you get, all the symbolism, his birth, his death, his resurrection, the Virgin, really everything. It's very rich in that.
Los santos, la Virgen, está riquísima de detalles.
It is, of course, a very deeply spiritual place that I truly do want to see. Somebody said once that a place where people have prayed over a long time becomes different. And I got the impression this is now a very different place from whatever it was when they began.
It's one of the most beautiful examples of what the popes call via pulchritudinis in our time.
It's been under construction for over 100 years. It's going to take 128 to finish, but I am confident that it will be completed.
They say Rome wasn't built in a day, And I think it's typical of medieval cathedrals in Europe that have taken centuries to build. I hope it isn't finished in my lifetime. I hope it's something that many generations can partake in.
Oh, but there is a completion date now. After over 140 years after construction began, La Sagrada Familia finally got a completion date this week. Well, kind of a roundabout one. The Daily Mail is reporting that the landmark could be completed between 2026 and 2028. I guess that kind of remains to be seen. We'll see exactly what happens with that in the future. Well, stay with us. There's much more currents ahead. Catholic colleges chiming in on the new contraception mandate. We'll have that story and the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, it is not a mass wedding, but it is a bunch of brides banding together for a good cause. First, though, let's have a look at the day's headlines. Today is the last day to comment on the new Health and Human Services mandate on contraception coverage, and Catholic colleges are chiming in. Under the rule, most private health plans are required to cover contraception and sterilization. Several colleges are asking the Obama administration to exempt all religious individuals and institutions from being forced to participate. The schools say the current religious exemptions are too narrow. The University of Notre Dame, meanwhile, is objecting to the mandate in a separate letter to Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius. The Pentagon has issued a new rule that will allow military chaplains to perform same-sex weddings. Under the new policy, the chaplains will be allowed to participate only if local law allows such ceremonies. Chaplains will not be required to take part if doing so violates their religious beliefs. The new rule comes 10 days after the military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, which prohibited homosexuals from serving openly, was officially repealed. In other news from Washington, the White House is condemning Iran for sentencing a Protestant pastor to die after he refused to convert back to Islam. In a statement, the Obama administration says that the attempt by Iranian authorities to force the pastor to convert, quote, crosses all bounds of decency and breaches Iran's own international obligations. Well, meanwhile, a U.S.-born al-Qaeda cleric who was considered a top terrorist recruiter is dead. U.S. and Yemeni officials say Anwar al-Awlaki was killed in a drone strike in Yemen. He was born in New Mexico, moved back with his family to Yemen at age 7, then returned to the U.S. for college in 1991, remaining here until 2002. He had been linked to at least 2 terrorist plots, including an attempt to blow up an airliner over Detroit in December 2009. President Obama called the death a major blow to al-Qaeda. Well, back in this country, a Tennessee mosque that's been at the center of controversy is officially under construction. Crews broke ground on the site of what will eventually be a 12,000 square foot multi-purpose center in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. A few hundred people attended the groundbreaking. The project has not been without its obstacles, though. Signs have been vandalized, construction equipment has been set on fire, and there have been bomb threats and a lawsuit to try to stop the construction. Elsewhere in Tennessee, some student groups at Vanderbilt University are not happy about new non-discrimination requirements from the school. Deanna Lambert has the story.
They're trying to move away from the stereotypical Southern, white, rich, Christian stereotype and trying to make it a lot more diverse.
Vanderbilt says 8 student organizations are not in compliance with the university's non-discrimination policy. 5 of them are non-religious student groups. Stephen Schall's group, College Republicans, is not one of them, but knows of some Christian organizations who are concerned about this policy change because it would affect who can lead their groups.
They're making it so that groups cannot require their officers to be of the same religious beliefs and the same core beliefs.
Schall thinks this is Vanderbilt's way of diversifying its growing campus, but at the expense of its Christian values.
They're really just chipping away Christianity a little at a time. I mean, it's the founding faith of the country, and they're really starting to, they don't attack it just all at once, but they start chipping away a little at a time, and it seems that's obvious what they're doing here.
What they asked our organization to do was different from what they asked the religious organizations to do.
Kenny Tan is the president of the Libertarian group on campus. He said last semester they were asked to change their constitution, adding in the new policy banning discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity.
I believe that student organizations should be able to discriminate on the basis of religious or political belief. Whether or not those student organizations should then continue to get funding would be another issue.
That story from reporter Deanna Lambert. Well, it happened in France. Now Switzerland could be the next country to ban full-face veils in public. Switzerland's lower house has already approved that ban. It now heads to the upper chamber. If it's approved, the full-face veils, which include Muslim burqas, could eventually be banned from Switzerland's government buildings or public transportation. Well, Pope Benedict has some advice for journalists. He says to have some quiet time. Rome Reports has details.
The Vatican is getting ready for the next World Communication Day. The theme is silence and word, and the message is specifically aimed at journalists. The topic is meant to remind journalists to take a step back from modern technology and the constant flow of information. Silence, says the Vatican, opens a window for reflection. It even invites people to engage in conversations that in turn can help promote the new evangelization. The celebration goes back to 1963, when it was launched by the Second Vatican Council. Decades later, it's still celebrated in most countries. World Communication Day is officially celebrated on the Sunday before Pentecost, which next year will be May 20th, 2012. Traditionally, the Pope's reflection is usually made public on January 24th, the feast day of the patron of writers.
Well, a Catholic cemetery in New Mexico is offering to bury people's cremated remains for free. It's all part of an effort to counter the improper treatment of ashes there. The church does not allow the scattering of ashes or dividing them among relatives. In an announcement last year, Santa Fe Archbishop Michael Sheehan called those practices, quote, bizarre. Spirituality could soon be coming to the small screen in a big way. Deadline.com reports ABC has purchased the rights to a drama to be written and produced by former Lost producer Carlton Cuse and pastor and author Rob Bell. The show reportedly will have spiritual overtones and revolve around a character who is a musician and a teacher. And Deadline is also reporting that Warner Brothers wants Steven Spielberg to produce a new movie about Moses. The website calls the movie, titled Gods and Kings, an epic-sized film about Moses' life. Spielberg has reportedly read the script, but it's not clear whether he'll take on the project. Stay with us, there's more currents ahead. Coming up, Bishop DiMarzio loves his job, and a recent survey shows he's not alone. Brooklyn's bishop goes into the deep to talk about it.
I'm happiest when I can be a priest, when I'm preaching, when I'm ministering the sacraments, when I'm able to not worry about all the administration I have to do.
Welcome back. So, got a question for you. Does your job make you happy? If you answered no, maybe a career change is in order? Something to think about anyway. And if a career change means going back to school for you, one place you might want to apply to if you're a man is the seminary. So why the seminary? Well, that is because according to a study out of the University of Chicago, clergy are the happiest in their jobs. Or as an article in Forbes magazine put it, the least worldly, reported to be the happiest of all. But is that actually the case? Well, I discussed the study's result with a man who has some firsthand experience, quite a bit of it actually, Brooklyn's own Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio. He's been a priest for over 40 years, and I sat down with him for this week's Into the Deep. Bishop DiMarzio, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
Really appreciate it. Of course, Forbes, we've been sitting here kind of talking about it before we are having the discussion on air here, but Forbes just recently came out with a list of people who love their jobs the most, top 10 happiest jobs, I guess we could say, and clergy topped the list. Are you surprised by that?
Not really. There's been other surveys done that I'm aware of Catholic clergy and priests, and despite sometimes the outward complaints, they're very happy. I mean, you can't poll them as a group and find them to be unhappy. They're innately happy, even though sometimes doesn't always look like that. But clearly, and when they're pushed against the wall, they answer a question. It all comes out. They have great satisfaction in what they do.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, it was this is something else we were talking about too. It's the list of top 10 happiest jobs and the list of the top 10, I think, most hated jobs they also came out with. And the top 10 most hated jobs are people that make generally a lot of money, but who have to deal with a lot of bureaucracy in the jobs and everything like that. But the people who were on the top 10 most loved jobs are people who really get to help people and work with people a lot. And firefighters, teachers also on that list. Why do you think that those jobs satisfy them so much?
I think when we're dealing with other people, that's a key thing. Satisfaction, that quotient is what really makes a difference. I was saying before, there was an article in the paper about teachers and their pay and everything, and one teacher went in response to really, should she earn more money? Of course she should, but she said, look, I'll never forget the day that this young boy in the 3rd grade got up and said, I never want to grow up because I don't want to leave this class because Mrs. Jones is so good. So, I mean, she said, that's worth all the money in the world. Wow. So it is satisfaction. It is when we're helping other people that most people feel best. It's not the money you have, it's the satisfaction you receive and the human interaction that really counts. And certainly clergy, priests get that from their people.
Sure. In your experience, of course, here with the priests of the diocese, do you think that most of them would have to agree?
I think they agree. I guess sometimes there may be complaints here and there, but, you know, again, when you look at it, they are satisfied in their job. Sometimes the conditions and the different things they have to do don't make them happy, but when you specifically ask them about their priestly ministry, overwhelmingly, they're very happy.
Yeah, and some people, you know, might say, well, this is a difficult time to be a priest. I mean, you got, of course, the economic downturn, which is just, you know, really hit a lot of people very hard. So there's that to deal with in parishes and wherever they serve. But there's also, of course, a lot of negative media coverage of the priesthood here in the past several years. What is it that, even during these difficult times, makes the priesthood something that we're seeing now, more of them, an increase in the numbers of people seeking out the priesthood, finally, after going through a time of real crisis. What is it about that even during these difficult times they can make it and even be on top of the list of happiest jobs?
Because I think people really do seek out priests. They do look for the ministry of priests in crisis moments, but in the normal, ordinary times. Priests do get that personal satisfaction from other people that they serve that is priceless. You can't put a price on it. You can't buy it. People wish they could feel that way, but priests, if they're doing their job properly, if they're following their vocation, they have that satisfaction, which makes them happy.
Sure. And of course, I have to ask this just before we wrap up. You, of course, are the Bishop of Brooklyn, but you're also a priest. Are you happy with your job?
I'm happiest when I can be a priest, when I'm preaching, when I'm ministering the sacraments, when I'm able to not worry about all the administration I have to do. I mean, that certainly is the happiest time.
All right. Well, very good. I can definitely understand that. All right. Bishop DiMarzio, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Had to get that last question in. It's always great to have Bishop DiMarzio in here, and of course we'll have another edition of Into the Deep next week. Stay with us, there's more currents ahead. When we return, turning a tragedy into an opportunity for change. Local women spread the word about domestic violence.
As members of the community, regardless where we are, we have an obligation to respond to this issue.
Well, finally tonight, it was a tragic story, but one that's inspired others to speak out. 11 years ago, Gladys Ricart was gunned down by a violent ex-boyfriend on a day that should have been the happiest of her life. One of the happiest of her life anyway. Well, today, as we continue our coverage of Hispanic Heritage Month, we meet one group, New York Latinas Against Domestic Violence, who have taken this senseless tragedy and turned it now into a cause for change.
We have to really come out the closet and talk about this. We have to take out our dark glasses and let people see our faces. The men, women, and children suffering from domestic violence, that amount of people need to end. Those numbers need to be reduced drastically, if not ended. And you're here today to do just that, and I thank you.
This is the 11th year of a Brides March, and the reason this came about was 11 years ago, a woman by the name of Gladys Ricard was going to be married on this day, and as her fiance waited in the church, her ex-boyfriend, who she had a very violent past with, literally just walked into her home. He just walked in the door like if he was a guest and shot her right in front of everybody.
We need to raise awareness in our communities. We need to know that domestic violence is not acceptable. We need to actually help the women, and as individuals and as members of the community, regardless where we are, we have an obligation to respond to this issue. It really is an epidemic in the city of New York.
Domestic violence is a scourge on the community and society. Gladys Ricard and so many others, unfortunately, so many other victims of domestic violence have paid with their lives. And today, men and women march alongside each other to send a strong message that domestic violence is absolutely unacceptable. It's a cycle of violence that must be stopped.
There is absolutely no excuse to raise a hand against a member of your family or a loved one, and that there is no reason whatsoever that you can offer to justify these abhorrent actions.
Once you see all these women in white, whether it's just white outfits or white wedding gowns, walking down these streets, it sends a powerful, powerful message that this is just not acceptable. You know, domestic violence is not acceptable.
The wedding gown is a sign of hope and a new beginning, and worldwide it's known as something that it causes celebration. Agustin Garcia took that wedding gown and put a stain of blood on it, and it is now upon us to change that perception that a man or a woman could have a reasonable excuse to commit murder. There is none.
We need to reach the women that are ashamed, that haven't told anybody, and convince them that there's help and that it is an important step to take.
I hope that today will inspire women and men that if they're in a violent relationship that they will get out. I hope children that are watching the news will say, you know what, I'm going to tell my teacher about this, because a lot of times children are suffering in silence. They don't tell anybody and they end up getting caught in the line of fire. We have victim survivors today who have lost their children here in this church waiting to walk. We need to talk about it, and our children need to know that it's not okay.
Taking a tragedy and kind of turning it around, trying to turn it into something positive there. Well, if you are looking for help, or if you just want to find out more information about domestic violence, both in English and in Spanish, make sure and visit www.bridesmarch.com. Well, that is it for this edition of Currents. You can visit us online at currentsny.net. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter, so be sure and check in with us there. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great weekend.